We have a cornucopia.
Sorry.
Hello, friends.
Yes.
No, you're all good. I can, yeah. How's everybody doing tonight? I hope everybody is well. You can see in front of us, we have a cornucopia of different things. And it's going to be really fun. I'm going to just push this screen because I have a message that's covering everything. Boom. Now we're good and clear. Friends, tonight is going to be a super fun tasting. I'm really excited for it. We're doing something, like I mentioned, a little bit more ambitious, never done before in the Mongers world. We're talking recipes, and it's not just because we wanted to try something new and, flex. It's really because as the weather changes, as this time of year comes along, we interact with cheese kind of differently. I don't know if anybody's experienced, but it's been really hot. It's been really rainy. Weather's been all over the place. But right now, when we can, it's the time of year to get outside. And I think our food should travel with us. And, we've had enough conversations over the years when people are talking about getting a board that we all know that like a brie can be challenging this time of year. Different gooey cheeses, even leaving your firm cheeses out at room temperature or hotter for so long, it can have its challenges. And so we wanted to focus on a couple quick recipes, things that you could take on a picnic that involved no cooking, but felt like they were both portable and a fun way to like fold cheese into the day at the picnic or the day at the beach. So that's our goal tonight. We still have some really fun things that I encourage you to snack on by themselves, but then we have a bunch of ingredients to kind of put together two recipes. It should be really fun. I hope you guys ask all the questions you may have. As I always try to say, this is so much more fun when it's conversational. The sound of my voice can get old after a while. I want to hear what you guys are thinking, what you guys are finding in the recipes and in the food. So unmute yourself if you're comfortable, ask questions. If you don't like unmuting yourself, if you're worried about any of the unmuting and remuting, Benji is on in the background and he will answer your questions on text or let me know what they are. So you can totally use that chat function. And Will should be arriving later as well. So we'll have another monger in the room, at least one more. I believe that's all the housekeeping. But by way of introduction, in case anybody I haven't met before, my name is Zach Bird. I am the co-owner and the head cheesemonger at Mongers Provisions. Benji, the monger behind the Mongers, is on the controls tonight. Benji, you want to say hi?
Hello, everybody. Excited to be here. Let me know if you have any questions in the chat.
Awesome. I always love to talk about the wine first, mostly because I like to have a glass of wine early on, and I encourage you guys to enjoy the wine tonight. I get progressively funnier as the bottles get lower. But I think Cava and sparkling wine in general sometimes makes people nervous. So I wanted to give a demonstration on how to open it. And in general tonight, I have as many little demonstrations as I could possibly think of. So I tried not to skip ahead too much. It's not going to be like watching the Food Network where there's like movie magic and I pull a perfectly done thing out of anywhere. So be patient with us. Any bubbles, I think starting any event with bubbles is the way to do it. But whenever you're opening these, the big key is to rotate the bottle, not the cork. We have a tendency to try to rotate the bottle. And what that leads to is our hand will lift to reposition our hand on the cork. And if we just use the bottom, we can keep pressure on the cork the whole time. Unlike the movies, we don't want to hear a big pop. We don't want the champagne or cava or prosecco going everywhere. So this is what I'm going to rotate. This hand's going to stay totally solid and on that. And I'm actually pushing against it. I'm trying to keep it from opening all at once very quickly. And we want to hear this little sound of, there it is. That was still a little bit more than I would have liked. And there we go. So nice and slow. And this allows us to get a beautiful mousse with our pour. That's what we call the bubbles. And, when we shake it up and spray it all over, that's really beautiful for a celebration, but you've lost a lot of carbonation right off the bat and it's changing the wine. So our two wines, to me, this is like, it's summer, it's time to be outside. These are what you should be drinking. I know people love reds and I promise we'll go back to it next tasting, but I wanted to start with bubbles. I think that no celebration, really no entertaining is complete without a little bubbles. And so we have a Cava this is a really beautiful cava, and these people are making cava with like the traditional method and the proper way, coming out of Spain, and you get the similar noses you get in champagne. You get a little bit of that like yeasty, biscuity flavors, and then a lot of citrus. Really beautiful. Mm. So staying in Spain, we have a beautiful Tempranillo, a rosé. Tempranillo is the same grape that we would use for Rioja. So I think it's really fun to see it in a rosé, because I think that's a grape that has a lot of depth, right? I often think of dried herbs, dried flowers, maybe even a little leather note, but having it in a rosé is kind of like a different personality of this grape. Way more fruit flavor, probably not as much of the aged smells and flavors, but you should still get some of that depth. And so this is from Latue, and these guys do things really well. They're making all organic grapes. They are doing things in a, I believe it might be in a biodynamic nature. Organic wine production really is a really interesting concept. That, it's not just about the grapes on the land. You have to think of this whole ecosystem that kind of goes into making wine. All of it needs to be organic, and it really makes a big impact when you are harvesting grapes in that way, because it means you're putting less pesticides and herbicides and things into the ground. So even if it's maybe a little more indirect, all the food on that property is going to be better. And if you have a lake on that area, that lake's going to be healthier. It has a wider effect. And I think these guys are really playing with making a sustainable operation. Okay. One more opening trick I want to talk about before is, in case anybody hasn't opened their olive oil. I've witnessed a couple of people struggle with these olive oils. I take it for granted because I grew up in the food industry, but they have a little pop top in them. So before you unscrew it, if you just get this little hook so it's sticking up, take it and then pull pretty hard, and you'll see now I have a spout for my olive oil. Then unscrew it. I had a guest tell me that they couldn't get into their olive oil, and then I watched one of our staff members do that. And so I didn't want to take it for granted. I think those are the quick opening demos. Does anybody have any questions before we kind of dive in a little bit more? Cool.
You are good.
I'm good. Awesome. So as you guys have heard me say before, we love storytelling. We love taking you on a journey. We really love showing you these foods that we love so much. And one of the things that we've kind of always thought about, and I'd say there's a lot of room for mongers to keep improving on, is this idea of application. So we have all these beautiful foods, but now what, right? People come to the counter all the time like, oh, how do you eat this cheese? And I sometimes give them a mediocre answer that I eat most of my cheese like an apple, because I really do. I come home and I just eat cheese. But that's not to say that there's not a way to elevate these experiences, right? We talk, and we will tonight, about those pairings at the end, making these perfect bites where you have a cracker, a cheese, and adding a little dried fruit, and then drinking in the wine. And all of a sudden, it's so much more than just a piece of cheese. And I'm hoping tonight, in a different way, we can show you how to elevate these things, and also kind of take a trip around the world in terms of traditions, right? We're going to do one recipe remixed a little bit that we're probably more familiar with in the Caprese salad, but then we're going to take something from like Southeast Asia, a spring roll, and add cheese to it from Greece, and really just kind of go off the map in a really fun way. So before we dive into that, I think I want to tell you guys about the cheese so you can snack while I kind of start preparing stuff. So the cheeses that we're going to really use as a recipe today are two white cheeses. So we have the Manouri and we have a Mozzarella, and please try them on their own, but save most of them for the preparation if you're kind of playing along with me. I love Manouri. Benji and I had a dear friend in college that we affectionately call Greek Greg Stamatopoulos. And Greg is, I swear, out of my big fat Greek wedding. He's a wonderful person, but he influenced us and always talked about Greek stuff. And really, just like the movie, he kind of talked about Greek superiority in every shape and every way. And he started me thinking about all these beautiful Greek cheeses. We have a big population of Greek people in Metro Detroit, and I think it's awesome to kind of explore cheeses that we don't see at the grocery store, right? We know Saganaki. Many of us just call it as it is, as Saganaki, but there's many cheeses that can go into Saganaki. There's more than just feta. There's more than just halloumi. So Manouri, Kefalotiri. These are some of these cheeses, Caseri, we see less often. Manouri is all sheep's milk, and it's coming from like northwestern Greece all the way through Macedonia. It's a cheese tradition that exists throughout that area. For us who maybe have never heard of any of these things and all the words that have come out of my mouth sounded completely foreign to you, think ricotta salata. It's actually another whey cheese. So this is a recooking of a primary cheese is made, and then I take that runoff and I can coagulate it a second time. And then it's drained. So it's really made very similarly to ricotta salata. And go ahead and take a little shaving so we can get a sense of this. I just love this texture. This time of year, Manouri is so fun to eat, or ricotta salata, because it gives you this like burst of milkiness, a little bit of salt. For me, I think it's a real good juxtaposition with fruits. So we have a peach today, but we really wanted to encourage you to think of all the recipes we show you as techniques. You can do whatever you want with this. So if you prefer strawberries or it's earlier in the season, strawberries are going to be great with this recipe. If you are doing it in the middle of winter and you can't get peaches, you can't get strawberries, I think if you did some grapes cut up really nice or roasted grapes, it could be really nice. This technique we're going to talk about is going to work with a lot of things, but make sure you feel how like it's one of those cheeses that reminds me of a cloud. It just has this really beautiful texture, really soft, and a light flavor. I hope you guys are enjoying that Manouri. This one's coming out of Krinos is the name of the company. And yeah, beautiful, beautiful cheese. So I have a recipe in there that we're not going to talk about. We'll talk about what we won't prepare, which is going to be pimento cheese. And don't get me wrong, I love Zingerman's pimento cheese enough that I almost never make pimento cheese. But as I have tasted many other brands and many other pimento cheese traditions, it's fun to try different ones. And so I encourage you to make your own, but we give you a 2-year cheddar as our base. We love this cheddar producer, Hooks. I think many of you guys have come across Hooks at some point in your life, whether with us or other people. Hooks cheese is really one of the bigger Wisconsin producers in the artisan world. And Tony Hook, who is an amazing guy, we were lucky enough to have him on a tasting, has been making cheese for like 50 plus years or so. Tony makes a lot of different cheeses. He does everything from blues to cheddars, but what he really has a reputation for is his extra aged cheddars. And we got a chance to celebrate the release of his 20 year a couple of months ago. I mean, probably a year ago at this point.
It was a year ago.
Thank you. Time flies when it's the middle of a pandemic and you're the 6-month-old. What can I tell you? So the 2-year cheddar out of Mineral Point is just, to me, it's the perfect cheddar. Like it has, go ahead and take a bite of it. It has enough like tang and character, but it's not so dry, so flaky that it feels like I can't melt it into my eggs or chop it up for a recipe, right? When you start to get to the 8-year cheddar, of course, when you get to the 12 and 20 years, it's crazy. It becomes its own thing, right? It's the center of the plate. It's no longer an ingredient. And so we wanted something that still felt like an ingredient. So this is the 2-year cheddar. I love that cheese. And then let's not forget mozzarella. I know sometimes we just kind of skip it because it's so, this is a beautiful mozz. We've been carrying this. I don't know if Will's joined. It's probably been about 3 years. He can probably correct me. For a while, we were pulling our own mozz, which I love doing, and I hope we get to do it again sometime soon. But something about hand pulled mozz is really great when you're a master, and when you're a cheesemonger who pulls it occasionally, it's all right. The perfect amount of moisture coming out of it's a Farmerette mozz, and so Farmerette's an old brand that has been resurrected by Krav Brothers. And what's really cool, Will pointed this out to me, mozzarella, generally speaking, on a small enough scale for the milk, right? Often have really disconnected with herd. Someone pulls it. This is coming out of a really big Wisconsin producer. They're actually a farmstead operation, so all the milk's coming just from their farm. So this ends up becoming a farmstead mozzarella. Really beautiful, mild, but I hope you can notice, even as I kind of push it, you see that whey that's trapped in there kind of drip out. And that's the key to good mozz, is not losing too much moisture in the pull. Mm, 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 mm. Okay, one more cheese and then we're going to start our first recipe. But the reason I wanted to point these out is I hope you guys are noshing and snacking the whole time while we walk through those two recipes. Applebee's Cheshire is a real treat that we had for you guys today. In the United States, I would imagine that most people on this call have maybe heard the name Cheshire, but they don't really have a sense of that. And this cheese, believe it or not, is at some point in the UK more popular than cheddar. Cheddar takes off post-industrialism. Before then, Cheshire ruled the world. Cheese that was more common in the UK, and I heard one of our staff call it proto cheddar, which I thought was a really cute name for it. It has a lot of similar characteristics. I believe these cheeses are cheddar. They're cut in a similar way, but it's even fluffier, even tangier than a cheddar. And we have one coming from Applebee's. And Applebee's farm, not like the American restaurant chain, is a really cool traditional farm. And what they're doing actually is the very last farmstead raw milk Cheshire made in the world, right? So it's a lot to think about. British cheese has a really fascinating history, at least to me. And most of their cheese traditions either became pasteurized or kind of disappeared post World War II. And so Neal's Yard Dairy, which might mean something to some of you, we tend to have at least one Neal's Yard Dairy cheese around, or we try to have a couple throughout the year. It's a really strong importer, and what they did was help resurrect all these different cheese recipes. So thanks to people like Randolph Hodgkins, who started that company, we can still enjoy these traditional cheeses. Applebee's Cheshire. If anybody loves the idea of a little bit of cheddar and apple pie, try it with Cheshire. It's actually probably predates the idea of using cheddar, and it melts a little bit cleaner in a cool way. So try that out if somebody wants to find other applications for the Cheshire. Okay, let's start a recipe. I've been rambling a little. Do I hear a question in there though?
I do have a question. When you think about the Cheshire cheese, what is your feeling on the rind? Is that something or cut away?
I cut it away. And if you like blue cheese or you like cavey flavors, I encourage you to eat it. There's a layer you don't see. So the really unappealing layer is the cloth, right? Both because cloth doesn't chew very well, and also because that's where all the elements and stuff from the cave have been kind of caught. So this rind underneath is really a natural rind. It's just that space between the cloth and the rest of the cheese. So if you tend to eat rinds like Gruyeres or Hollerhockers, try that rind. I think you'll enjoy it. If you don't tend to like those flavors or blue cheeses or caves, none of that sounds appealing. Just enjoy the taste of the cheese. Great question. Thank you for bringing that up. Any others?
We did have one as you enter the first recipe. What's the ideal cheese to peach ratio, which I assume you will get to momentarily.
Ooh. Yeah, I think the ideal, I'm probably going to use a half a peach, a little bit less for my first wrap. But we'll get to that next. We're going to do the first one I'm going to do is the Caprese, a little warm up for me, okay? So let's grab your tomatoes and go ahead and take the stems off if you haven't already. You'll notice right off the bat, we don't have big heirloom tomatoes. We're going to flip the script on Caprese. And there's two reasons, right? A, this time of year, we don't have a good set of great heirloom tomatoes. They have sourcing abilities, right? We got all these tomatoes as well as some of our greens from Fisheye Farms, a Detroit farm. So we wanted to use stuff that were easy to get. And we wanted to show you how you can enjoy this salad throughout the season, even when the tomatoes aren't perfect. The other idea is, I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to a picnic where someone fans out the tomato slices and mozzarella slices for a traditional Caprese. That's great, but it's really hard to eat sometimes. You either have to cut it with a fork and knife. It can be very drippy. What I'm hoping to do today is create something that's a little more like any other cold salad and is a little bit easier to deal with in that regard. So we're going to take our tomatoes and I want to cut them down to be bite size, but you'll see we have a variety of shapes and sizes. This reminds me of when beet season, when I was cooking in fine dining, and chef told me when I asked him how he wanted me to cut the beets, that the beets will tell you how they want to be cut. So a little guy like this, I'm going to keep it whole for a nice pop. But something like this that's bigger, I'm going to quarter this tomato. And so we're going to get a variety of those different textures and sizes going. Go ahead and cut all your tomatoes, put them in a mixing bowl. We're going to season our tomatoes. So we're going to go ahead and do that, having some of them, quartering some of them. The little guys will keep whole. Beautiful. Throwing a tomato across the room is always a good move. Boom, boom, boom. If you do not have beautiful small tomatoes, we had a long discussions about these, what tomatoes we were going to source. I think the next step this time of year is to do something like that, vine ripened tomatoes. I think those can be quite nice, but we are really excited to talk about Fisheye Farms. You know, Andy has been doing a great job, and he's been doing a lot of the produce for some of the cooler restaurants. And we just, you know, anytime we can talk about another small business is fun for us. And he brought these in on Monday or Tuesday, and you could still smell them from the warmth of the sun. It was a really special thing to get fresh farm deliveries to the store. I wish that happened more often. Okay, almost done, friends. Thanks for your patience. Okay. One of the things I mentioned in the variations that you can do is you could make this into somewhat of a panzanella. Panzanella is usually with really stale bread that you kind of let soak up all the dressing. In this case, I wouldn't do something fully stale. I do more of a country crouton, if that means anything to anybody. So take larger chunks of bread and sear them real hard and let that be your crouton. But I have my cut tomatoes. I'm now going to season my tomatoes. Actually, sorry, I'm going to add my mozzarella first. So I want mozzarella chunks that are going to be somewhat similar, mimicking those tomato pieces. So I'm going to take 2 nice chunks, and then from here, just kind of quarter that. And I like the idea that some of it's going to be rounded edges, and then some of it's going to be more of this slab. So we have different pieces. I'm going to put this a little smaller. Boom. Okay, and then this chunk. Beautiful. Okay, now I'm going to season everything in here. And I'm not going to season with my balsamic. We'll drizzle at the end for a couple of reasons, right? Balsamic is going to be the messiest, and I want to have that beautiful display of the balsamic. And it also, because of the weight of it, can kind of fall to the bottom. So we want to get my olive oil. And for anybody who prefers measuring things, I think you want to start with something like a tablespoon of olive oil. And then I'm going to start with about a teaspoon of salt. And about a half a teaspoon of black pepper. And we're going to toss that all together. One of the things I always was amazed at, especially when I went to culinary school, and then after culinary school, I cooked in fine dining for a while. But before culinary school, I had cooked most of my life. And one of the things that blew my mind in culinary school that they taught us to do was stop right here and taste your food. If you're at a mediocre restaurant, that's one of the big things that they don't do. They're just saucing and tossing and selling it. They don't actually pause to taste your food. There's a famous chef, if anybody's familiar with Danielle Boulou out of New York, who said the nicer your food is, the more people have probably touched it that night. And that always stood out to me. So go ahead, grab a piece, make sure we've seasoned everything enough. I really like how that tasted. And then you could do this 2 ways, right? If I was going to a big event and I wanted a big bowl of salad, I'd probably stop here and I would tear up my basil, tear up my balsamic, and let people scoop out and finish with that. If you're plating like I'm going to tonight, you can kind of make it a little bit prettier. So I'm going to go ahead and make a nice pile of salad in the center of my bowl. Beautiful. And then I can go ahead and take my basil and kind of tear it. People will talk, you'll hear people say you have to tear your basil, that the knife bruises it. You know, once again, if I'm doing a lot of preparation beforehand, maybe I don't want to chiffonade my basil before because it would bruise. But if I'm just serving this right now, I can go ahead and do that. So you can tear. Feel free to do that if you wanted to cut something. The word I use, chiffonade. You peel the leaves, you roll it. Let me move this bowl so you can see what I'm talking about. You roll it, and then we cut it as thin as we can. If you have a knife at home that doesn't feel like it's sharp enough, and you find that every time you pass through the herb sticks together, make sure you're doing that full range, using the full motion of the knife, and that'll help. And so I can just kind of boom for presentation purposes, and then finish with a little bit of balsamic. We've been using the same balsamic for quite a while at the store, and I just love this stuff. It's Acettio Modena is the name of the company. So if anybody's ever been in the store, it's a white box, and it has a black label or a gold label. And the gold label, what the difference between them are, they're both condimented balsamic, and I can talk a little bit about that. But the gold one is going to have a higher grape must to wine vinegar ratio. So if you think of traditionale balsamic, I don't know if anybody's ever had the privilege. We sell one that's like $120. These are grape must, right? You press and you let time and take its course and make beautiful. If I'm going quick, I wanted something where I just want something like and it's cost me. Then I take that same grapes and I actually press it and make a grape vinegar. When you get to the condiments, you mix them in different ratios. So the gold's thicker and kind of looks like those glazed balsamics you might see, but they're not reducing it. They're not cooking anything down. They're not adding any caramel syrup. It's just thyme. I think they're awesome. I had a privilege of visiting them in Modena when I was out there before pandemic. And one of the things that blows my mind, we talk about farmsteads so often in cheese, but you don't usually talk about estate vinegars, right? I don't know if I've ever even seen that on a bottle, but this idea that you're making vinegar from your grapes. These folks actually, all the grapes on property, and even the wine vinegar that they make comes from their own grapes, so not just the grape must. So that's our beautiful little bowl. What do you guys think of that first recipe? It's super simple, and it's meant to be simple. And you can kind of see how I could do a bowl for one, or I could batch that salad out quite a bit more. What questions? I know that went quickly. Do we have thoughts or questions?
We do have a question as people gather their thoughts and start tasting. Back to something you mentioned earlier about the Cheshire cheese and apple pie. Someone asked if you could if you could grate that cheese into the crust of an apple pie.
You could. So Sister Pie has a great cheddar apple pie recipe, maybe cheddar Gouda pie now that I say that aloud. And this cheese, the hardest part with that recipe or that idea and technique is going to be grating. It's so crumbly. I might encourage you to take your chef knife out and just chop it up really fast, and you'll probably get further. If you did it, I think that what's going to happen is because it's a softer cheese, it's going to fully integrate into the pie shell in a way that Gouda, sometimes you get little kind of nuggets of cheese still in the bite. This won't do that. It will just fully integrate. It will add a savory component for sure. It'd be really nice. I think that's a cool idea.
Cool. We have a comment from
any other questions?
We have a comment from Steve. Very appealing. Would also work well on a bruschetta. So.
Oh yeah, totally.
And Steve, to that point, another variation on the salad is to kind of toast some bread just so that it's got a little bit of chew to it. You're not making like a hard crouton necessarily, but just getting it browned in a little, olive oil, and then toss that into the salad as well. And that would be kind of a traditional panzanella salad. With the mozzarella, that makes a really, really wonderful picnic snack as well.
Yeah, I think that this salad, Will has a good point. You could add more to it very easily with the panzanella. If you wanted to add things like grilled corn, I think that this is a great way to add more. And obviously you're going further and further away from the caprese, but Will and I both in our cooking we love recipes, but hate them. I personally if I have a recipe out in front of me, I barely can cook without reading it over and over. It really drives me batty. And so once you kind of feel comfortable with the technique of, seasoning everything, you can really start to get a little jazz with it. You can improv and pull different things. And we hope that the looser structure of our recipes isn't a point of frustration, but it really gives you a little bit more liberation where you feel like you can do that. So if you have a corn cob that needs grilling, add it to the salad. It's going to be delicious.
Zach, why does the caprese work so well together? Why does it flow? Why does it become so popular?
I think that the two things that came to my mind right away is a taste of seasonality, right? I don't know if any of you guys have ever had a caprese in the dead of winter with like a beef tomato that tastes more like water than it does mozzarella. It's not going to be good. It's going to be really disappointing. And so I think the fact that we wait and that we get this snapshot of a season, that's a big part of why they're so special. Will and I tend to I really only eat the salad during heirloom tomato season. I thought I hated tomatoes growing up, and then I lived in California at a fancy restaurant eating heirloom tomatoes all year and realized that I kind of like tomatoes. I just really don't like bad tomatoes. And so I think that's a big part of it. I also think we talk a lot about if it grows together, it goes together. And, it might seem basic or without even worth mentioning, but like olive oil, balsamic, mozzarella. I mean, Italy's a gastronomic wonderland for a reason. And so when you start to put together these simple ingredients in a simple way, you start to highlight how good these ingredients are. So, I encourage you, especially when you're approaching salads like this, it makes a big difference to use good olive oil, good black pepper, good salt, because there's nowhere to hide, right? I think that's a big part. I didn't mention the olive oil, and I apologize. This is a cool Spanish olive oil, Marula. I really love their stuff. And we kind of love selling stuff in a small tin, because they're cute, great stocking stuffers. But also, olive oil is a really special product that I think in America we have yet to really understand our relationship with it, right? I don't know about you all, but I tend to buy more olive oil than I necessarily can always consume. And then you have this bottle that you're like, oh, it's so good. And then 6 months later, 8 months later, a year later, you're like, it's not so good anymore. Olive oil really should be consumed within 6 months to a year. Every single season, they have a new harvest. And it obviously, if it hasn't been opened, it's going to be a little bit better off. But olive oil isn't meant to be saved. So having something small allows you to taste it at its peak. Back to this having too many bottles, I have Marqueta Belzueza, which is the same company, and they're higher end olive oil. But I've had it in there for a while. And so I bet if I tasted it next to each other, this would taste so much more vibrant and delicious, even though this is their, quote unquote, more everyday olive oil, because that bottle's been sitting around for 6 months and it's only this much left. So there's all that oxygen to kind of break it down. So fresh, good olive oil, good black pepper that's freshly ground makes a huge, huge difference as opposed to having pre-ground black pepper. And a nice salt is never, worth discounting.
One more question, Zach, that just came up in the chat. If you were to use a flavored vinegar with caprese, is there a particular flavor you would use?
That's a good question. I thought about I have a bottle of Traditionale on my beverage cart over to the left of me. And I thought about using that because mine's finished with juniper. And I thought it would give you a nice flavor. And when I say finished with juniper, the last barrel it sits in is a juniper barrel. I think that there are some fun ways you could do that. I personally really enjoy the more subtle flavorings of balsamic, so things that are finished in different barrels, more so than the full infusions. But I think that if you have one that has an herbaceous note that you really like, that could be fun, or something that has something that's going to play well with that tomato flavor. So I'm still stuck on herbaceous, but something that's going to pull out those notes is going to be fun. And same with the olive oil. I don't tend to have a lot of infused olive oils, but if you decided to make this whole recipe with a citrus olive oil like we have at the store, I believe we have a yuzu one right now, or a smoked olive oil, that could be cool. And I think it would add a totally other element to it. The idea of the smoked kind of sounds awesome right now. And I might just like we talk about with pairings, if I wanted to pull out that smokiness and those flavors, I might season a little different, right? So let's say, hypothetically, we're going to do one that's a little smoky. The first thought I have is, instead of just salt and pepper, let's put a little caraway in there or something like that that gives us roasty, toasty notes, and maybe a little bit of fennel with that smoked olive oil, and have a bigger, bolder kind of salad. It's also a great way if you were trying to make this early in the season, or you were really disappointed with your tomatoes. Maybe this is a time to add an infused or flavored olive oil, because the tomatoes aren't going to carry enough of the show. Cool questions.
Yeah, and one thing to Zach's point about the recipes being a suggestion but not a rule necessarily is, I definitely made this salad with really good sherry vinegar before. If you're out of balsamic, get creative. To Benji's point, part of what makes a caprese work so well, on top of all of the things Zach mentioned, is fat and acid. You've got acid from the tomatoes, fat from the olive oil, fat from the mozzarella, and then acid from the vinegar. And almost any combination of those things, as long as you, like Zach said, taste them and find that balance, is going to work really, really well. And, sherry vinegar tends to be a little bit more bracing and intense in its acidity than balsamic. So again, like Zach said, if you're early in the season and the tomatoes are lacking a little bit of that acidity and sweetness, the sherry vinegar can help amp the acidity up a little bit where the tomatoes might not bring it.
Absolutely. And I really love sherry. I think it's a flavor that, if hearing that made you be like, sherry vinegar, like, please explore sherry vinegar more. I think it has so much flavor, at least good ones. And both balsamic and sherry, especially if you tend to be like a scotch or a red wine and that's aged in wood, these are all taking advantage of this idea of the interaction between barrels and product, right? When I was in Assetio Modena, it was crazy seeing barrels that were 100 years old. They literally, if a barrel is splitting at the seams from the wood being so old and absorbing so much vinegar over hundreds of years, they don't throw away the barrel. They build a barrel around that barrel so they can keep getting all that flavor. And sherry takes advantage of a whole system called the Solaris method, which I won't go into, but they have like a large pyramid of barrels, and the vinegar travels throughout these different barrels and has a different interaction with them and different gaps in oxygen that really flavors it. It's one of those very simple, I just take juice and I let it sit in these barrels, but wildly complex processes, both in the Solaris method and how it interacts and how much oxygen and how much vinegar you draw. And when you talk about balsamic, they actually tend to go through a series of barrels. I believe there's 7 woods that are approved by Italian law to be a traditional balsamic. Let's see if I can come up with them. There is cherry, juniper, beech, oak, and I said cherry, didn't I? I can't. I used to remember this, but part of the reason balsamic's so special is you can't get these trees the same way. Like acacia wood is one of them. You can't harvest new acacia trees in Italy to make the barrel. And so unless you have a set of these old barrels, you can't get into it. It's not a new person's game. So I think that you're like physically tasting the little remnants of the vinegar from the very first batch that they had, both in sherry and in balsamic. It is a product that you can really get lost in the romance. At least I can.
One last question before we get into the next recipe. What's the difference between sherry vinegar and cooking sherry?
Ooh, great question. Great question. So cooking sherry has not been vinegar. Cooking sherry is going to be one of the types of like drinking sherries that has yet to go through vinegar. And the reason why it's cooking sherry is usually it's not the highest quality. There's a handful of different sherries, and the varying kind of characteristics of what's the difference between like Pedro Jimenez and a Manzanita, I believe is one of them, is the dryness. So sherry starts really dry, we in this country don't have as much experience with really dry sherry. Cooking sherry tends to be dry. There's also creamed sherry that's usually meant for cooking purposes. And as you get to a higher sugar content, you get to things like Pedro Jimenez, which is a specific grape used in sherry production that has the highest sugar content. I tend to like the dessert wine sherry more than the dry stuff, but they're really fun and really fun to explore with conservatives. Kind of a taste of what it often is eaten with.
Cooking sherry also often is salted a little bit.
Oh, good call.
Thank you. And so if you're 14 and your parents out of town, you can drink the cooking sherry, but it's going to make you really thirsty. But it's an interesting product. It's like we took wine that you could drink, added some salt to it. It's still sold on the grocery store shelf. But again, if you're used to seasoning your food and tasting it as you go along, adding salt to the sherry is kind of unnecessary. So I think it's a lot more versatile to get a decent bottle of sherry. It doesn't have to be amazing. And depending on, like Zach said, what you're going for in the dish, you can use a dry sherry and then add sugar to it if that's the direction you want to go, or you can use a cream sherry. If you're doing kind of a classic like sauteed mushrooms and sherry, cream sherries, what you often use in that sort of application. Whereas
lobster bisque as well, right? Is that a cream sherry finish?
Yeah, I would probably go cream sherry in that for sure. And the vinegar, you're taking all that alcohol and residual sugar and then oxidizing it further and converting it to acetic acid. So that's what's happening, and that's the difference there. But like Zach said, the cooking sherry still has, it's usually still running 8 to 14% alcohol. I don't quote me on that, but it's definitely above beer level usually. So it will have some alcohol that you can cook off, or, like if you're 14, you can just drink it.
Do you think the adding of the salt is actually to combat the 14-year-olds getting drunk on cooking sherry? I'm so curious what the history of that is now.
That's a really interesting question, whether that's like designed to inhibit, consumption as a beverage, or whether it's just like, let's make it more tasty for recipe applications. And we'd have to talk to like a food scientist or a marketer about that, I think.
We'll do some research on that, but it does make me think of not to, there's probably a statute of limitation, but when I learned how to cook, there was definitely a little white wine for the food, a little white wine for the chef. And I think when you have a salted sherry, that would probably help limit the amount of wine for the chef. I guess I should remind people, I started cooking at 14 is when I learned that technique. So yeah.
Full disclaimer, Mongers purposes does not endorse that kind of behavior anymore.
Not at all. And I wasn't working there yet. This is not that old of a company.
But some might argue that salted cooking sherry is superior to kosher for Passover wine, which was the other frequent option at 14 years old.
I would argue that for sure. All right, friends, are we ready to go on to Manouri spring wraps?
We are. One thing, so Zach, your camera went out next to you for the stage, which is fine, but just so you might want to hold some things up. Don't worry about it. But I just don't want you to pointing stuff at a blank camera.
Good, thank you. Apologize for that, guys. So before we delve into this, I want to give credit where credit's due. Kim came up with this idea, and I think it's brilliant. I love this idea, and I got a chance to eat one of these earlier today, and they're delicious. And I think that so often, we get lost with the things we've seen before, right? How can I eat a cheese on the go in a packaged kind of thing? Well, grilled cheese sandwiches or quesadillas, and we don't tend to reinvent these things. And I just, to me, this was such a refreshing and cool idea that I had never seen before. And so kudos to Kim. And I really encourage you to think of this once again as an open architecture, right? If you have a different fruit around or a different set of herbs, you can do this. It's really a simple idea that can house any of the ingredients that you find at hand. So what we're going to do is we're going to first season our cheese, and then we're going to build the wrap. So Manouri, I think that you should take at least half of your piece right now, cut it up, and we're going to crumble it into a dish for seasoning. Go ahead and just use your hands. It's, like I said, very soft. And as we kind of mix the other ingredients, it will get a little bit more broken down. So you can see I just have kind of rough chunks right now, but it will get further processed. We're going to zest. And I wish I had this camera on just because I wanted to give you all a little zesty demo. And this is something that I just find when I watch other people cook. I see a lot of people go back and forth really aggressively. And there's two reasons why I think this isn't the best way to zest. A, it's taking a lot of work. Second, if you go past that first layer, that's all the zest you have. The rest is pith, where there's a lot of bitterness. So I want to encourage you when you're zesting to think of it as peeling. So I'm going to take my lemon and just go slowly in one direction, all the way from the tip of the lemon to the other, to the edge. So I can get long, beautiful ribbons. And I'm just going to go around this lemon once. And I can go over it again and get pieces I missed in that way. But I find this is a little more elegant way. And since I grew up in not grew up, but I worked in a fancy French restaurant, I would have got yelled at for the cha-cha-cha. Chef also always chopped his zest. He didn't like the long pieces, even though he made us get them longer. So out of force of habit, I'm just going to give it a little chop. Add that to my Manouri. And then you might have seen me earlier when I was kind of waiting for everything to start. I picked my herbs a little bit. So we want to go ahead and pick a couple beautiful oregano leaves and mint leaves. And we're going to take those. And, you know, I'm not going to chiffonade this. It's going to get all kind of beat up. So don't worry about rolling it into a tight bundle. Just kind of put it on your board and give it some chops. If you're at in fine dining, when you come in for a stage to see if you get the job, if you come in for a trial shift, the very first thing they do is have you go pick herbs, which I think is A, buys you time, get out of my hair, go pick herbs, and B, they see how meticulous you can be when you both pick and then chop your herbs. I remember having many a pints of diced parsley sent back by the older chefs. And I then remember when I finally got to become a hotline chef, telling someone to cut my chives better and sending them back. So came full circle. So I have, I guess back to proportions, we have half the piece of Manouri. I probably have a teaspoon of lemon zest and now a tablespoon of this mixed chopped herbs. Okay.
The Cheshire cheese, we have a request, the one that's right in the middle blocking your cutting. You move that
move
piece.
the Cheshire.
Perfect.
Boom. Thank you, friends. I appreciate that. All right. So I have my herbs, I have my zest, and I have my cheese, and I'm just going to kind of mix it together. And I want it to be, you know, pretty small pieces. So I'm using my spoon to kind of break up any larger pieces I have and getting it all really nice and integrated. Now, Manouri is usually a somewhat salty cheese, but it's also mild. So I want to take this opportunity to see how's my stuffing, how's my farce here. Yep, I'm going to add a little bit of salt. Okay, and then I want to add some lemon juice. So, boom. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Now mix again. And you can see, I'm going to actually come up to the camera real quick so you can see that this is all pretty well integrated and has a nice look to it. I'm coming, friends. So there we go. You know, I have this kind of beautiful cheese mixture. It has all those herbs and brightness. This is so delicious. All right, so step one there. My peaches. You could do this in a variety of ways, but I really like how I watched Kim do it earlier because it made me think of when you get spring rolls and you have the shrimp. kind of pressed up against the edge. And so I want us to slice our peaches in segments so it almost mimics the shape of that shrimp. All right, so let's clean our cutting board a little bit. Okay, so boom. And this is what I mean, right? I'm getting nice kind of getting the curve of the shrimp, or the peach. And we'll make sure that you can see that against the edge of the final product. So I'm cutting, just for anybody who is really into the ratios, I have half my peach I'm cutting, and I used half my Manouri, and I think this will make me one roll that I will split with my wife, who is off camera, enjoying the Caprese salad. Okay, so let's go ahead and use my bowls to clear off my cutting board. Mise en place, having everything in its place is important. Boom, boom, little wipe of the board. Okay, now the nerve-wracking part, but it's super easy. We're gonna get our rice wraps. Have people worked with rice wraps? Show of hands or write in the comments. I'm curious if people have had experience with these. If you have, it's super easy. This is going to be one of my first ones, so I sure hope it's easy. But the idea is we want to wet this rice wrap, but what's important to remember is the wrap continues to absorb water after you pull it out. So we want to give it a dip on one side, couple seconds here, not too long. I want to give it a dip on the other side. Same idea, not too long. And then what we're looking for is, I want it to be rigid, but I want it to start to feel a little bit more pliable. So this one feels still dry. I'm going to let it soak a little bit longer, but like I said, it's going to continue to soften after I pull it out. So not too long. Oh yeah, see, it's pliable. It's feeling a little less plasticky. I think that's probably it right there. Okay, you can now arrange this on your board however you want. You could keep it as a square, or you could do a diamond. When I was shown the demo, she made it into a square because she was so used to wrapping dolma, grape leaves like that. To me, I'm putting it in a diamond. I'm taking a nice chunk of watercress. That's going to be down the center, maybe a little offset, so it's going towards one of the corners. And I'm going to line that up right next to a line of cheese. All my cheese is out there now. Ooh, don't miss any of it. There we go. And then, so I have a line of watercress, a line of cheese, and I'm sorry you guys can't see it perfectly. And now up against that cheese, I'm going to put my peaches just like they were little pieces of shrimp. Boom, boom, boom. And the reason I like to do it towards the corners is because, especially if you don't have a lot of comfort with wrapping things, the egg roll wrap or the burrito wrap, this gives you a little bit extra space in the corners to work with. So we're going to go ahead. Ooh, I wonder if I oversoaked it. No, we're good. I'm going to take my corner.
Can you move that lemon?
Yeah, I can move anything. Thank you. Thank you.
And the and the marula. That's great.
Perfect. So I'm taking my corners and I'm bringing them in. And you can see I might have over wet it. So I'm taking the knife to try to help me a little bit. Boom. And now I got the sides in. And I can, just like an envelope, take it. I'm going to take the front corner. Boom, 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 boom. And I'm going to use this. I'm going to go over. And then I'm going to use that to tighten it, right? Pulling it back. And now I roll. Boom. And you can see my peaches are up front. They didn't show the right side. I should have had them facing the other direction. But now I have this amazing rice wrap, which has cheese, greens, fruit, and you can split it. And the one thing we didn't talk about is, if this is really flavorful. We seasoned our cheese. The cheese was flavorful to begin with. The peaches are in a really nice place. But you could take this a step further and make a dip. We could make something like a sherry vinegar sauce or some type of dressing for it really easily. But that is the idea. And I really I feel like this is a recipe that I could see myself doing all those variations I keep mentioning throughout the seasons, right? We talked about the tomatoes being kind of limiting, but I think that any fruit is going to be really good with this. I'm going to sit here and kind of work on another one because I thought I want to get that shrimp placement perfectly. But what are you guys thinking as I work through my second batch here? What questions do you all have?
No, Will just mentioned a minty aioli, and what would be a perfect dipping sauce for this? Knowing that spring rolls and all these salad rolls often have a dipping sauce with it.
Yeah, the traditional dipping sauce you have with a spring roll is a combination of vinegar and fish sauce, and it has this sweet savory thing. And so I think you could mimic that. I think I love fish sauce, and fish sauce with these fruits would be a really cool flavor. I think maybe I would limit the amount of fish sauce and tone that a little bit down, but do something like a sweet rice vinegar, a little bit of fish sauce, and a whole bunch of herbs. And I think that'd be a really nice dipping sauce. If you had something like a sherry or a balsamic, I think that could still be the vinegar, and then maybe more oil or water or something to tone those flavors down. But I think all of those are going to be good. It's that sweet and salty type of thing, and that acid. Will mentioned it earlier. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the salt, acid, fat cooking series, but she's amazing. And really, if you start to think about food in these basic kind of building blocks, you can do anything. So I think we would want a little richness in that sauce, and we want a little acid in that sauce for sure. But you can really go in any direction. Well, I like the idea of the mint aioli also, instead of just mimicking the sauce that is more common with it, doing something that's a little bit thicker. And yeah.
We'll also mention an herb pesto, which could be interesting.
Ooh. I don't know if any of you guys have heard me make this complaint, but I cooked for a long time, and I worked in restaurants. I went to culinary school. Will just God-given talent. He is an amazing chef, knows how to put food together in a way that when I was younger, it used to frustrate the heck out of me because I was working so hard learning all these things, and he just had it in his brain. So I always love hearing what he comes up with and eating his food. Okay, so let's do another one here. I think what I want to do for this one is just to kind of make it so it's even easier, and I ensure that my peaches do what I want them to do. I'm going to put them down first and then do my next couple layers. So let's get here our other wrap. Let's move the last one so you guys can see as we're going here. Oh no. Okay. Okay. One more time here. So just like I believe Will said earlier on the phone, like a minute on each side is more than enough, 30 seconds maybe, and then a minute on your board. So fully submerged.
Like 5 seconds.
I'm gonna try to
3 to 5 seconds.
What a minute.
He's never good with time.
Done. I'm never good with time or remembering things. Okay, so I want my peaches down first, so I make sure that they're pressed against the outside, doing that shrimp like I wanted it. Piece is ugly. Boom, boom, boom. Perfect. Then I'm going to go ahead with my watercress. Great. All my cheese on top. Kim was telling me part of the origin of this recipe was that she was asked to make a recipe that was vegan, gluten-free, and fully portable, which I feel like is a tall order. That's a lot of different things at once. All right, so you saw I brought my corners in. By the way, this is the same way I wrap cheese. We call it the envelope method. And then I'm pulling it forward, and then I'm dragging it all back to tighten that roll. All right? Dragging it all forward, and then I can just roll from there. And this time, voila, we got those peaches looking like the shrimp do on the outside. And we have another wrap. Okay, I'm going to need to take a bite of one of these now that I've made two. It's been too long. So while I'm chewing, Benji, do we have any other questions?
So we have a few comments that have been popping up here. One, the cheese almost takes up the umami spot that a Vietnamese dip would add. Had a swig of the Tempranillo after the spring roll and it tastes like chocolate. Amazing. And these are flavors we've never put together at home. Delicious. So, probably a good transition too to talk through the tasting and the pairings and the wines and all that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad the Tempranillo tastes great with that. I'm glad you guys are enjoying. I think the peaches are going to go well with both of them in a really nice way. Sorry, I'm just taking a sip of wine and enjoying that myself. So I think most of you guys have heard this before, but I'll go through it pretty quickly. We've always loved doing these pairings and talking about pairings. And I think pairings they're powerful, they're fun. They're also, somewhat personal in terms of what people like. It's going to matter on their preferences, but we've always approached pairings keeping two things in mind. This idea of contrasting flavors and complementary flavors, right? And so contrasting flavors, think of really, really decadent stuff with really high acid wine. And complementing flavors, I always think of like buttery Chardonnay with a buttery lobster, right? We're just pulling out those buttery flavors. So that's kind of the framework. And then the way we evaluate if a pairing works is we've always used this language of -2 to +3. I think if I asked everybody on the call, what do you think of the Cava, 1 through 10? You all have that language. But when I start asking you, what do you like more with your vegetable wrap, Cava or rosé, it can get a little bit more confusing. It can get more difficult. And so we use this language, and it was taught to me by the late, great Daphne Zepos. But the idea is that a -2, both products fall apart. Brushing your teeth and having orange juice in the morning. -2, no tropical sweetness, no minty fresh. -1 happens when just one product just kind of falls apart. I find wine is usually the product that falls apart if it's just a -1. You ate something, it tasted great. You tried it with wine, and the wine tastes metallic. It kind of has a contrast that's really rough. Zeros happen a lot. Zeros happen for two reasons, and I like to pause at this point because I think it's important to remember that not every food is meant to hear a symphony as you eat it, right? We eat plenty of foods just for nutritional purposes that don't have these great pairing elements, and I think that that's all right. I also think mindfulness is incredibly important. And when I'm doing a million things and I'm getting food ready and the baby's crying and I'm trying to get out the door and whatever it might be, there's no mindfulness brought to the food, and you're not going to taste these pairings in that same way. But if we can pause and slow down and hopefully have these moments like we have over the camera, we can have those really beautiful pairings. Now, when we get to the positives, a +1, think of cooking a tomato sauce. I add a little wine, all of a sudden my tomato sauce is really great. The wine's no better for existing in our tomato sauce. A +2, I'm hoping we're going to experience +2s tonight. Maybe when I was talking about Manouri and I said that it tasted like a cloud or that it was this beautiful light cheese, you're like, I don't know what he's talking about. It crumbles nicely, it's just cheese. But maybe when we wrap it with a little bit of the peach and then we add even more acid with the rosé, all of a sudden out those different flavors and everything elevates, and this is a really special bite together. And that's what we hope to do, right? Hopefully we're always providing you with really good food, but if we can show you how to take that really good food and take it up a notch, it's just it's more fun that way. And so I'm going to go ahead and take that bite because I think somebody suggested it. I want to see what that tastes like. And, I mentioned earlier this idea of complementing flavors. And I don't know if anybody remembers from the very beginning, but I mentioned Tempranillo sometimes has this like dried herb herbaceousness. And this one's obviously a little more bursting forward with fruit, but that's still back there. And so when I eat that with all these chopped up herbs, it kind of plays that up a little bit more. Really, that's a fun pairing. The Cava is going to be really great. The bubbles are always such a great way to kind of deal with fat, right? And so I probably would enjoy the Cava more with the Caprese. I already handed mine off to my wife, so she's eaten that already. But I think the Cava is going to cut through that mozzarella really well. Still going to go great with this. I think they're both going to be a good pairing tonight. What other questions do we have, friends?
So one thing that was brought up in the recipe itself, there's a portion where it says add vinegar, and the rice wrap recipe includes vinegar and with the seasoning. What would be the recommended vinegar with something like this?
Sorry. You could totally use the balsamic. I think when that was in there, we used the lemon juice instead of the vinegar, by the way, for acid. But if you wanted to bring vinegar, one of the ways that I had thought about this recipe earlier was, I think it'd be really nice to take a bunch of red onion, cut it up really thin, julienne style, and then toss wine vinegar and let it sit for a half hour before you go into this recipe. What I like to call that is affectionately a quick pickling, and that's going to give you this burst of acid in a really nice way. So I would say pickled red onion or quick pickled red onion would be a really nice way to get acid into there. We used watercress. You could totally use arugula. If you don't like peppery greens, you could use iceberg in this. I think it's a really versatile recipe. What else?
Onion plus fruit, with fruit plus 2 as a vote with that combo.
Yeah, that's a nice combo right there. Benji, is there another question? Because briefly, I want to talk about the pimento cheese recipe real quick.
Yeah, please talk about pimento cheese.
Cool. So I have the recipe super simple because I'm a simple person. We have cheddar, mayo, pimento or piquillo peppers, cayenne, salt, and pepper. And you see, once again, there's not a ratio because I really want to encourage you to taste as you're cooking, right? Chop up your cheese, chop up all the ingredients, add a little bit of mayo. Mix. Is it the wrong texture? Add a little bit of mayo. You can always add more. You can never take away. Otherwise, you need to cut more cheese. And the pieces we want for this recipe, in case you ever do this at home, is we want little pieces. So you can totally just sit there and cube your cheese, which is part of the reason we didn't do this live on, is because it's really boring to watch me sit there and cube pieces of cheese. But I like it to be really tiny. Zingerman's recently, they now use a buffalo chopper, so it's even shredded a little bit more. But I like tiny little Grenois of cheese. And you can do a lot of variations. If I spent some time looking at pimento cheese recipes, seeing if there was one I just wanted to kind of copy and paste for you all. They go all over the place. I tend to eat this really plain one, but you can find, if you've ever heard of Sweetgrass Dairy is a creamery that we've used before. Their pimento cheese is really cool, but it reminds me almost of like a vegetable cream cheese. They use a little bit of cream cheese and less mayo. They use bell peppers, carrots, a whole bunch of stuff. And I think that back to this idea of the open architecture of these recipes, make that base. And if you have a little bit of celery that needs a home or a little bit of carrot, and you can just chop that up and add it. Or if you find mayo isn't your cup of tea, you could totally use some cream cheese and sour cream into this recipe instead of mayo, which is one of the variations I saw. So play with the pimento cheese. I think it's a fun recipe, and it's super simple. It melts kind of messy, but it's also fun to put on a grilled cheese or a cheeseburger if you're looking to get sloppy with it. I love that cheddar. All right, what questions do we have, friends?
We did get a question about, we didn't include peppers and cayenne and mayo in the box for this particular one. Obviously, those are good recipes. So we did have someone ask if that were supposed to be included. So just to clarify that they were not for this particular time.
Yeah. Benji, that reminds me, I just want to thank everybody for embarking on something new with us, right? I know I saw a couple emails about mozzarella water leaking out or packages coming at different temperatures, and just thank you all for your patience with this. This was ambitious for us. We've never sent produce, and so we couldn't have it too cold or ruin all the greens, and we needed to have it in a certain amount of cold. And so your feedback's really helpful as we try to dial in these type of procedures. And to Benji's point, we did not include the ingredients for the pimento. We just wanted to include the ingredients of what we were going to do together. But the pimento cheese is hopefully a pretty simple recipe. You might have those ingredients at home. No pressure either way. cheddar is great on its own. Great suggestion on things you can do with it. And, we love hearing from you guys about what tastings you want to see next because it helps us continue to elevate and push and come up with new ideas. I had never thought of doing the whole cooking demo box. So I hope this was enjoyable to all of you, and I'd love to hear your feedback either way.
So Zach, a question that came through as a pimento cheese connoisseur. What is the most unusual recipe or ingredient you have enjoyed?
I think I was really shocked at the amount of vegetables in the sweetgrass dairy one, and I think the one that shocked me was this idea, because Zingerman's is so plain, it's just the mayo. I didn't realize that you could use other fats like sour cream. One of the recipes I saw had absolutely no mayo, and it was just sour cream and cream cheese, and I think that'd be so much tangier. Trying to think if there's another. We did some recipe testing with Zingerman's. I guess it was probably a year ago, where they actually were trying to come up with a new pimento cheese, where they did a totally different planet where they used feta and did a Greek pimento cheese. So it was a bunch of oregano and thyme, feta, tomato product. At that point, it wasn't so much of a pimento cheese, but it was a fun spread. I'm trying to think if anything else jumps to mind. Will, do you have any pimento cheese? Yeah.
Lip Tower. Has anybody had Zingerman's Lip Tower?
I love that stuff.
That actually, it's a Hungarian cheese spread, but it's pretty assertive on, black pepper and garlic. But it also has anchovy paste in it, or, maybe just anchovy fillets. And that, the Lip Tower is like on the other end of the spectrum, whereas pimento cheese is kind of sweet and creamy. The Lip Tower is a little more dense and really salty, peppery, garlicky. But I think a little bit of that umami thing going on with anchovy or potentially even fish sauce, but then kind of blend it back with the sweet pimentos and the mayo or sour cream could be really nice. Haven't done it, but I think it would be worth a shot.
Yeah,
I think I know what I'm doing this weekend. I think that sounds awesome.
Someone mentioned an egg salad version of pimento cheese as well. A pimento cheese with a egg salad or a ton of egg within it. It's kind of interesting.
And is that Steve or Jasmine?
What's Blaha who mentioned that?
Jasmine.
Oh yeah. You can also do that.
What do you mean? What do you mean it's like egg salad?
I mean, it's pimento dip with egg in it. It's
okay. So like a lot of egg.
Yeah, it's eggy, mustardy for some reason, and then a lot of cheddar. And
sounds great to me. I mean, but some people hate egg. Eggs. All mayo salads, I feel like, are very polarizing. Like you either like them or you don't. My dad. You got to put a gun to his head to get him to eat potato salad or coleslaw if it's got mayo in it. He'll eat a Russian potato salad or a German potato salad that's mustard based, but anything that's primarily mayo, no chance. But I love that stuff. So I'd be all about putting egg in a pimento cheese. I think that would be delicious. And
I've
like
also
chopped up yolk would really, I think, be a nice addition.
I've also seen that same application taken a step further, where you do deviled eggs. You do that same exact preparation, then restuff the egg. I think it was Mary who used to work for us that did a Lip Tower deviled eggs one day. Beautiful stuff.
And if you think about like dusting your deviled eggs with like a hefty dose of paprika, and you've whipped mayo into the yolks, that's kind of the same flavor profile that you're going with on a pimento cheese.
Zach, question about the Cava. What is the best way to cork or store it if people were not able to finish it tonight?
Just get it done.
Yeah, just get it. Thank you, Will. Just get it done. If you don't have at home anything like a wine staver, it gets really difficult. I would encourage you to just drink it. I would also remind you that wine that has lost its carbonation is still good wine. And so really good for cooking, especially. But if you like the flavor of it still, it's definitely still delicious. I like having a wine saver. I don't know if any of you guys know that they're like rubberized corks that you can put in and then pump the oxygen out. And because you pump them, they can fit into this. There are such things as champagne wine stoppers that kind of clasp onto the edges so they can handle the intense pressure that happens as you cork them. But I apologize, I don't have any home remedy if you don't have those materials at home already. Oh, look at him. Yeah, that's exactly.
I happen to have one of these that a wine rep left at the store like a long time ago, and it was sitting in my backpack right next to me at this
That's
moment.
so funny.
But it goes on the top like that, and then whereas the pump ones don't work if the bottle's generating any pressure because they'll just shoot off.
Yes. But it is actually it's an interesting experiment. If anybody, especially if you have a nice bottle of champagne, it might seem intuitive, but one of my most interesting champagne tastings, the person who was leading it had us swirl our glass the entire time they were talking, really so we could off gas all the champagne, because you start to realize that the carbon it's another ingredient. And so tasting the flat versus tasting it with all of that carbonation is two different wines in some ways. So it's an interesting experiment. If you do not have a solution, I encourage you to try it tomorrow and see how different it is, and you'll get a real sense of how that flavor changes for all your sparkling wines. It's an interesting idea. Any other questions, my friends?
No questions right now. Can you tell us what's upcoming, Zach?
Oh, I certainly can. So we're going to do a taste of tradition. I used all my restraint not to make many Fiddler on the Roof tradition jokes with that, but we're going to do, when I say a taste of tradition, we're actually, instead of talking about, shtetl life, we're going to talk about traditional farming practices. And what I'm really excited about is this, juxtaposition between our perception of traditional farming practices and what these farmers have to do today in a fully modernized, industrialized world to make beautiful cheeses. So we're going to focus on a handful of cheeses that have really specific farming practices and what that means for the cheese. Kim, once again, the creator of these beautiful spring rolls, she came to our company with a degree or a certification in permaculture, which is a really interesting concept. And I think that permaculture, biodynamic, organic, these are all terms we hear so often. So we're going to hopefully shed light on the definitions of these terms and then talk about creameries that really champion these ideas. So very, very fun tasting coming up. And for anybody who is an OG fan and remembers names like Lemieux's or Essex cheese, we'll be focusing, I think it's not focusing, but it'll be the first time at a tasting you'll have tasted Rispens, which is their new sheep milk Gouda that we talked about at our Essex tasting a year plus ago as the newest cheese coming out. So we'll have Rispens, we'll have a cheese from Idle Farms that you guys probably have not tasted, because we know we show them a lot of love, but we're going to source the cheese we haven't had for years from them. So it's going to be an exciting tasting. So that's coming up. As always, we have all sorts of fun, how to build a cheese board. If you want to watch that video and get that box, we have our portable provisions boxes. Boards are back in full swing. We're also doing tastings in store. So if you're local, please come by, come taste some beautiful stuff with us. It's so nice to be able to talk about chocolate and then be like, now try it again. It's pretty amazing for us to get back to that. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's coming up that I should mention. Oh, okay. So this isn't going to be advertised on Facebook. It's not an event necessarily, but something very big in the works. I have a giant wheel of Emmentaler. I'm so excited about it. We've talked before about these 80-pound wheels. You guys, for those who've been following us since the beginning, you watched us get the ability to bring in a Parmesan for the first time, and a Comté and a Gruyere. Forget 80 pounds. We're going straight to 200 pounds. Emmentaler what we call Swiss cheese in America is the largest traditional wheel. And we're talking about something about this big around, that tall. It's going to be like cutting a coffee table in half. That should arrive next week. We got a 1-year-old Emmentaler with our name carved into the side of the wheel. So very excited to open that, and you'll see that featured on some grilled cheese sandwiches as well as some tastings coming up. Did I miss anything, guys?
I just want to give a quick shout out for those of you who have been through 1 or 2 of these before, or this is your first one. The Blaha family was the first family, the first people to do a private tasting with us. They came into Farm Field Table. They reached out to us. They said, we'd love to do a cheese tasting. We met them. We rendezvoused at Farm Field Table. We walked across the street to Urban Rest. We sat down, had some beers, tasted some cheese. It was really cool. And this was basically 4 years ago now. And that kind of kicked this whole thing off. And so, thanks to them, I think it was basically their idea. And
Totally.
so we are permaculturally indebted to you.
Thank you, friends. And it goes to show you that you guys coming up with suggestions is how we continue to grow.
We also had a shout out from Nick and Liz that they went to Shelbourne Farms. They toured it this summer, and it was amazing. What they wouldn't have known about it without the Cheddar event last year. So it's, all comes full circle.
Thank you, friends. That's heartwarming, and I'm glad you guys went. If anybody has a chance to go in Vermont to visit that farm, it's it's an old Vanderbilt home, if I remember correctly. It's a pretty amazing farm, so check it out.
Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure, and again, as Zach said, please email us. Let us know what you thought of this event. This is the first time we've done any sort of cooking demo online. We haven't done a cooking demo since Zach did a Mott's pulling demo back at Farm Field Table 4 years ago or something.
Yeah.
That's the last time we did a live recipe demo or anything hands-on, so feedback, positive, negative, send your emails, let us know what we can do better. We love sharing food and time with all of you. So it means a lot, and we always want to do it better each time.
Very well said. I couldn't have said it better myself. Friends, thank you guys so much for your attention, your love, and your feedback. We really, it's such a treat to be able to share these moments with you guys. It's been a wild and crazy year, but these tastings have been such a special highlight for us. And please continue to follow us along. If you enjoy listening to us talk, check out our YouTube page. We have all sorts of tastings. You can see some of the tastings we've mentioned. We record, and this will be posted shortly, so you can see that in the future. And keep giving us our feedback and your suggestions, and we'll keep showing up with wonderful tastings. And thank you all so much. We can't wait to see you, and stop by the store, get a grilled cheese, and thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks again.